Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us here in the session. My name is Keith Sayre. I am from Novia Consulting. I'm the Power Platform team lead there, and I'm excited to come to you today to share with you how to build, run, and analyze a survey with Power Automate. That's the topic of our presentation today. First of all, I want to thank the DynamicsCon community for their support and for voting for this session to make it part of the agenda. This is going to be a fun thing to share with you all, and I hope that you'll get a lot out of it. It was really fun to kind of learn it and kind of work through the process, and I think that it will be useful for you as well. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Keith. I'm with the Power Platform team at Novia Consulting. My background is actually in marketing. That's how I got into analytics and automation in that context. And then as the company grew and when we sort of worked through a bunch of different automations and building dashboards and things like that, that's how I kind of got into the Power Platform, sort of the path for me. And then also the kind of the icing on the cake for that, to give me the Power Apps bit of background that's helpful in that context, is I was also highly involved with our CRM that we used internally as well. So that kind of gave me the ideas for how to work with Dataverse and all the different Microsoft Power Platform components as well. So my experience is, as you can see, I've been in several different industries, including transportation, nonprofit, the healthcare industry, and higher education. And as we go through our presentation today, I want you to feel free to go ahead and put any questions that you have into the box on the right of the screen, and I will be sure to answer those during the Q&A session at the end. So as we go, if anything kind of comes up that you want more information about, feel free to let me know. So our agenda for today, there's really three movements that we'll be going through, and each is tied to a specific Microsoft platform. And so we'll kind of work through each one, and each part is also part of the process as well. So I think that you'll see how each section of this presentation will build on the last. So in the first section, we're actually going to be talking about building your survey. I'm going to be talking about some things to think about, how you want to structure it, and then jumping into actually Microsoft Forms to kind of go through a couple of different technical showpieces for how to build your surveys there. Then the second part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about distribution and taking actions based on your survey results in Power Automate. So I'm going to show you a couple different simple flows to get you started, and then also kind of how we've structured our particular survey program to give you an idea of how that can be done in your context as well. And then finally, in the last part of the presentation, we're going to be jumping into Power BI, and we're actually going to be showing you how you can see the results of your surveys and kind of visualize them and kind of draw insights from them in Power BI. So each part we're going to kind of set ourselves up for the next. So let's kind of jump into it. But first of all, I wanted to kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from, where this presentation came from, and that's the application that we went through. So the situation was we wanted to really get a good sense of what our customers thought about our support process as a whole. So not just kind of, hey, did you like that particular service incident or something like that, or that particular product? We wanted to kind of get sort of an all-up understanding of what our customers thought of the company in terms of our support process. So that application is sort of what's behind when I'm going to be talking about the examples as we talk through this process. So that's where I'm coming from. So our objective was to write a survey, keep it reasonable length so that we could increase our participation rates and make sure we're respecting customers' time, and then send it to a cross-section of customers. So again, that's sort of, we kind of built a list of people that we wanted to respond to that so that we would not get multiple responses from a single customer was sort of the idea. So that's sort of where I'm coming from in this. So let's jump into the first section, and that's going to be talking about building your survey. So let's kind of get started with that. So a lot of people are very tempted to jump straight to the tool that you want to build with. So in this case, it would be Microsoft Forms, but there are other tools out there. Like if you decide you wanted to use it through a particular tool first, that's really not the place where you want to start. So you really want to start with the question, and it seems kind of simple, but it's so easy to get over, to not stop there, is to say, what do you want to actually know? And that question is what will be informing everything that happens next in your survey building process. So, for example, in our scenario at my company, we wanted to know what our entire customer base thought of our support system. So it's not really a matter of capturing service failures or even service successes individually, but sort of a general sentiment is what we were after. So we decided to distribute our surveys through a targeted email rather than automating a flow, as we'll kind of show as sort of one way you could do that later. So with automation, you can get feedback that's a lot more targeted, but it's harder to really control the time frame. So what we did was we kind of made a list, sent it during a specific time, kept the survey open for that time, and then closed it off to get a very specific time frame for what we wanted to measure. And then we also worded our surveys with this question in mind. So we sort of said things like, based on your experiences within the past 3 months, how would you rate us on XYZ? Rather than saying something like, okay, thinking of your most recent incident, what would you say? Or saying, based on your experience with ticket number 4567, what would you say about our company? We tried to avoid any of that kind of language and make it more, hey, this is a snapshot in time. What do you think of us as a whole? So that really came about because we took some time in this first step of really thinking about what we wanted to know. So as you can see, when you're thinking about that naturally leads into the second question of who you want to ask. I've got broad categories on the screen right now, but you can be much more specific than this if you want something, if you want to reach someone more granularly. So for example, like with customers, it could be the customer owners or CEOs. It could be the IT department. It could be the CFOs. It could be someone like the night shift workers. You want to get their opinions on a specific thing. With for example, your donors. It could be everyone who donated to your nonprofit. It could be people who donated according to a certain threshold, like when they got over a certain threshold, we want everyone over that amount. Or maybe you want to do it more categorically, like say, hey, I want to get everyone who did a memorial donation. I want to survey them to see what they're thinking about our nonprofit. So that last one, the general public, that one gets a little bit tricky, and it's sort of its own animal, really. If you want information just from anyone at all, like say if you want to kind of measure trends or get people's thoughts about software as a whole, even if they're not necessarily your customer or anything like that, that's one way you could do that. Keep in mind that if you're surveying the general public, a lot of times you may need to think about quality control on the data after the fact. So things like making sure that each survey has the right things submitted, throwing out blank questions and that kind of thing. So just kind of keep in mind that you may need to do a little bit more cleanup if that's your scope. And then our last question when we're thinking about designing our survey is we're coming back around to how we're going to distribute it. So that's where I said don't skip here. Make sure you answer those first two questions before you get to this point. But now we can really think about it from a different perspective, right? So for email, for example, you see I've listed personal or mass. So my thinking there was that you could structure this to be, hey, I want my people who work with a specific customer to personally ask them to fill out a survey. That's one way you could approach that. Or you could do a mass mailing of the survey invitations. Be like, hey, customers, we are opening our satisfaction survey. This is the close date. Send it to everyone on your list who's eligible for that survey. You could do that kind of stuff. So, and then with the general public, you could do social media. You could have a link on your website, text and SMS campaigns, and then as well as Power Automate. So that's, again, we're coming right back around to the Power Platform. So Power Automate can be very helpful if you want your survey to reach someone based on another trigger. For example, if you have Dynamics 365 Business Central, you can trigger that survey X number of days after an invoice is paid, or when a new customer is created. So yeah, there's a lot that you can do with the distribution part that is customized to what you want to be doing in your survey and who you want to reach. So it all kind of comes together, all three of those questions. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and jump into Microsoft Forms, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how to do that. I'm not going to go into super huge detail about this product, but I am going to show you basically, some of the cool things that you can do with it. So let's start by just creating a new form. And it's very user-friendly to enter information. So we could say Dynamics Con, and then we'll just sort of add questions. You note that there's a lot of recommendations that come up with this. You can see, how would you rate your overall satisfaction with this presentation? And it's actually based on a previous form that I've created. So yeah, we can just add all these questions to it, and it comes up like this. And there's all kinds of different sorts of questions. So if we add a new question, we have choice, we have text. That's where they can just enter text. You can make it a long field if you so desire. We have things like they can upload a file, the Net Promoter Score, which we'll kind of come back to in just a little bit with the presentation. So yeah, and one of the cool things that you can do with this is, let's go into the settings. So you can decide who you want to get this survey. So if you're sending it out to people outside of your organization, make sure you select that option. You can change all of these different things. So like we can do shuffle the questions if you want, so they're in different order for each time they load it. I think this is pretty important to customize your thank you message. That way you can say something more personal. You can say, hey, we really appreciate your business and feedback, whatever your survey happens to be. I do recommend that everyone customize their thank you message because it just makes it a better experience. One other thing that I want to show you with the forms and specifically is this thing called branching. And with this, you can do things like, you could say a yes/no question. And then what we can do with that is we can say, and let's actually take this question down. So what we're going to do is add branching to it. And if the customer says yes, we're going to send them one way. We're going to send them to question 6. If they say no, we're going to send them to the end of the form. So now when they are completing this survey, they're only going to see up to question 5 when they first get there. But if they select yes, they'll see question 6. If they select no, they won't, and then they'll go in and submit the survey. So you can do that for things like, would you like to do a customer case study? And then you could potentially put a whole section of questions that ask them for their contact information to do that. Just sort of all sorts of things you can do with branching, with getting different things. It also helps you with the length of your survey too, because people are only answering questions that are relevant to them if you're limiting if they appear or not based on a previous question. So that's always a nice user-focused thing to do. So next, I want to go over to a form that I've already created, and this is actually for this particular presentation. So what we've got going on is we've got, how would you rate your overall level of service? And it's just a customer satisfaction survey, is the just like what we did at our company, but more generic. Please explain your satisfaction level. And then we have a Likert scale, which is going from strongly agree to strongly disagree about all these statements. And then we have that NPS score. And then we have this, would you be willing to participate in a case study? And then the final note, and I wanted to kind of point this out separately just because I think it's important for your analysis later. So one thing you may want to consider is if you want to hook up the survey results to your existing data sources, you're going to need some kind of key to do that. So with Microsoft Forms, it is possible that they would log into a Microsoft account to take the survey, but that's sort of unreliable, especially if you just make it so they don't have to, which is, you probably want to do that for usability's sake. So it's always a good idea if you want to connect this up to your other data sources to ask them to insert their email address in the survey. So in this case, I'm just saying so we can send you a thank you note. You could do a giveaway or something like that to make them feel a little bit better about that. So yeah, just keep that in mind. That should probably be a question in your survey if you're going to be connecting up to like your CRM or your Business Central or anything like that, because we just need that key. So yeah, and if you've never been to Forms before, I suppose I should mention this, that it is included with many Microsoft 365 subscriptions. If you want to see if you have it, you can just go to office.com, and if it's available to you, it'll appear on the list of all apps in here. Let's head back to the presentation, and then we'll kind of move on to the next section. So in this section, we're going to be moving into Power Automate for the most part, and we're going to be talking about distribution and follow-up activities. And this is really cool, and I think this is where you can really get the most interesting results from what we're doing today. So first of all, you have to decide when you want to use Power Automate for your survey distribution. Like I mentioned, in our case, we did not, and that was because we didn't want to base it based on a trigger. We wanted to send it during a specific period of time. But these are situations where you would want to do that. So if you want feedback on a certain event or a certain transaction, like say your service case was closed in your system and you want to send out a survey after that. If you sold a particular item, you could do sort of an automation to send out a survey a certain number of days after that's been fulfilled. You could also set things to survey your customers when they're new customers on a certain cadence. That can be a useful thing to be like, hey, check in 90 days and see if they're more satisfied or less satisfied if you send them the same survey at 6 months, something like that. So you can see, is the customer satisfaction staying consistent? Is it going up as they've worked with you more? That kind of stuff. So just sort of some ideas I'm throwing out there as we're going through this. Power Automate's also really great for regularly scheduled surveys. So, if you want to do something annually or monthly or quarterly, you can set it on a recurrence and keep it going over time. That's a really useful case for that. So what can you actually do with your survey results in Power Automate? So this is sort of on the other side. So what I just talked about was just distribution of your survey, and that's just sending them the link to complete it based on a trigger. This is now what happens on the other side when the survey comes back. And this is where you can do some really fancy stuff, I think. So basically any connector that works with Power Automate that has an action can be used with the information you're bringing back into your survey. So before you decide what you want to connect up, you need to analyze your process to see what actions make the most sense for your use case. So as you can see there, that's just a very tiny snippet of the hundreds of connectors that are out there. And all that choice can feel a bit overwhelming, I know. So it's helpful to really start by developing your solution, ask what makes the most sense for what you're trying to accomplish, and going from there. So here are a few examples of ways that things that you can do with your Power Automate results from your surveys. So here's a few recommendations I have as you're thinking about this. There's a few types of actions that are pretty much helpful no matter what from your survey. One of them is a thank you email, which is a really good one that you pretty much always want to do. You always want to send a note to the customer that's filling that out to let them know that you appreciate what they did. It's very easy to automate that in Power Automate, and we can show you how to do that in just a moment. And then the second thing that you pretty much always want to do with Power Automate is make sure that you're recording your results for reference later. And you'll see that when we go into the flow, how I did that. And then there's a couple other ways there's many ways you could do that. But this is just sort of one way that I found that works really well. So next you want to think about the systems that you're using and who uses them. So for example, does your customer support manager, do they want notified when there's a low satisfaction score? And then do they mostly use Teams? Or maybe they're more of an email person. So just check with your flow, with your team flow, to figure out which flow that you should be using for your workflows. So yeah, as you can see, I've got just a couple examples. Notifying someone immediately of a low score. You can ask customers about something you would like them to do. And if they haven't done it, add a task for your account manager. So the example would be, for my head is like, have you scheduled a quarterly business review? You could have that as a question in your survey. And if the answer is no, then you can tell the account manager to get that scheduled essentially, automatically. You can also compile your list of responses in Excel, SharePoint lists, etc. And that's what we'll be talking through when we go into Power Automate. And then that will enable us then to take the results into Power BI. So you can see we're sort of going one to the other. Everything's building on itself. So let's flow right into Power Automate. And then if you've been in the Microsoft space for a while, that will make a little more sense. So now that we're into Power Automate, I'm going to show you first of all how you can trigger the survey to go out based on any trigger that you choose in Power Automate. That's actually very simple. This is just a quick example because I didn't have necessarily an automated process that I could guarantee would happen during this presentation. I just made this as a manual process, so I just have it to enter an email. That's just my input. You could imagine that if you use, for example, a Dataverse connector, all you got to do is grab the email from the customer record to send your email. So this trigger is just going to trigger when I want it to. It's going to ask me for an email, and then it's just going to use the send an email action. And it says, thanks for your business. Let us know how we did. Please fill out our survey. And all I did with this was I found from my form, you can go into share, and then it has the link right there. So you just take that link and put it into your flow, and then your flow is actually going to be doing the filtering for you in this case. So you don't have to necessarily do any kind of filtering at this point. So if we go back to the flow here, we can do something like run in this case, and that would happen in the background if this was an automated trigger. And then we could do an email address. And you can see that it has run now. And you can see the results. So this is something I definitely recommend you do when you're testing these out, is to just kind of give it a test, see what all these things have done, and then all the outputs as well. So you can see everything that happened, what came into it, where it went, and then if it was successful. So in this case, it's going to be sending that email out to me, and then I can go over to my inbox and it will be in there for me. There you go. And yeah, this is a very simple example, but you can get much more advanced than this. So that will take me right to the survey. So now, now your recipient can complete the survey, and that will go into your next part of your flow, which is going to be what happens after a survey is submitted. So I've built this one more custom. So I'm starting with a new trigger that is called when a survey response is submitted. And you'll see that when you go to make a new flow as a possible trigger in the Microsoft Flows section. And then all you have to do is make sure you're signed into the same tenant and then select the correct form. In this case, it's that customer satisfaction survey. And then what will happen at that point is submitting this form is going to trigger the flow. Then what the flow is going to do is get all the information from this specific survey completion and give it to me in the flow that I can then play with and do all sorts of fun things with. So here's sort of a quality step, and this is just something I learned from doing it actually, because that field for asking for the email, it can they can put anything they want in there. So if they don't actually put a correct email, then some of these email flows will not work appropriately. So in this case, what I've done is I've just created a conditional step. You can see that when you add an action, and that's just a condition. And then when you do a condition like that, you can say, okay, so what I want to judge is the questions. You can see everything that we've got above is going to be showing down here as a possible thing that we can reference. So in this case, we want to please let us know your email address so we can send you a thank you note is the question where they give us the email address. We want to make sure that it contains an @ symbol, and that's just sort of a quality step. So if that's not true, then we can assume that the email is not correct. It's not a correct email, and we just go this way. So if that's the case, then it's going to skip these 2 steps because these are related to email, and it's going to go on to the last step. But if their email is formatted correctly, we're going to go and do a couple of checks, and I think this is where things get really fun, because what you can do is you can start to say, okay, so I want different responses based on what they said about the company as their overall level of satisfaction. So in this case, I've gone ahead and put in conditionals. This is an or statement. So any of these things, if any of these are true, it's going to say yes and go down that way. So we can do 1, 2, or 3. You can't do a range here just because these things are actually saved as a text field. It's just sort of a weird thing that's going on. So just keep that in mind. So if you want to do several different options and their numbers, you can't really do a range unless you do some manipulation of it up here. You could possibly do that. But if you just pull it right from here, it's going to be saved as a text field. So you want to do it like that. So you can see I've got 2 separate emails. If this is true, so these are 1 through 3, which I'm considering a low score, it's going to send what I'm calling the conciliatory email. It says, hello, and we hope you're doing well. Thank you for your thoughtful feedback. And it's important for us to know when we didn't quite reach the mark. So thank you for letting us know. So that's what they will send if they have a low satisfaction score. And then vice versa, if that's not true and they have a high score, so to say, I'm pleased to hear that you're satisfied with your experience is sort of the main gist of that. So the email is going to be based on what they said, so it's going to feel much more personalized. Then you'll remember that we put in a question that says, would you be willing to participate in a case study? If they've said yes to that question, we're actually going to send a note to our marketing department. Let's just pretend that's their email address instead of mine. And it says, new case study. Hello, we have a customer indicate that they'd be willing to participate in a case study. Here's their email address to connect. And it's given them that email so they can set up an appointment for that. So those things, I mean, I hope you're kind of thinking through this and being like, oh, well, could I do that? And the answer is probably yes. You can probably do different things based on your survey responses. So anything that's in Power Automate, these are just fairly simple examples, but I think they kind of illustrate the point that you can really do a lot of customized feedback. Then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to actually add it to a SharePoint list. That's what I'm using in this particular case to keep track of my results. So I just created this list. If you haven't used SharePoint lists before, again, they're on the All Apps section under Lists. It's very handy because you can set up all these different columns and all different types for them. Keep in mind that one of the things that I did do with this to, again, because of the text and email weirdness, I just made all of these fields. I matched all the questions that are in my survey, but I made all the fields text fields. You can see when you add a column, you can select the type. Just kind of keep that in mind when we go into the Power BI section. So I did it all text fields, and then in Power Automate, you just simply map each question to the column on your SharePoint list. So now it will add the responses based on all this. So we can do something like this. And you see I've already got my thank you, and I was the person who got the case study notification as well. And then you can always see your flows again through the run history. You'll see that that's part of that as well. So that's kind of the flow part of the process. So let's go into analysis. This is kind of cool. So we're going to take that SharePoint list that I showed you and actually use it as a Power BI source. And I think you're going to find that because we asked for the email, we can link things up. It's going to be really cool. So first of all, think about the metrics that matter to you. Do you care about the average scores? Do you want to calculate scores based on multiple questions? The fact is, with DAX and Power BI, you can do all these calculations any way that you want to get the metrics that are most important to you. So that's just sort of the thing to keep in mind as you go. We're coming back to NPS score. And that's the question that says, how likely would you be to recommend us to a friend or a colleague? That's going to be important on the dashboard I'm going to show you because we did include one of those questions in there. So basically, if you rated a 0 to 6 in that question, you're considered a detractor. A 7 to 8, you're considered a passive. And a 9 to 10, you're considered a promoter. That goes into the calculation of the score, which is sort of a large scale satisfaction score. And the way you calculate that is doing the percentage of your promoters versus minus the percentage of your distractors times 100. And basically that just moves it from percentage to a whole number. So your score can range from negative 100. So say if you had 100% detractors, that would be negative 100. If you had 100% promoters and no passives or detractors, that's the thing to keep in mind is passives are not taking things from it, but they're decreasing the total percentage of promoters, if you see what I mean. So if you have 100% promoters and you add one passive, you're not going to minus anything, but the number you're going to start with is lower, if that makes any sense. So NPS, there's a lot to talk about with it, and I know they're going to be sharing this presentation with you after the fact. You can get access to that. So I just put in this DAX expression. So if you're using NPS, this is the DAX expression that I use to calculate NPS score. So hopefully that's helpful to you. You can copy and paste it and change the table references, and it should work for you. But you'll have a chance to get that after the presentation. And then again, as we're going, if anything, if you feel like I'm going too fast or you want more detail, I'll be available to answer your questions after the fact. Make sure to just put them into the box to the right of the discussion. So yeah, I've already kind of touched on this, but make sure you have the email in there if you want to analyze by CRM or ERP. We'll see where that comes into play in just a second. So let's head over to Power BI. I'm going to start by just very briefly showing you how easy it is to get that data that we just created. So we're going to go into Power BI Desktop, and we're going to hit Get Data. And this is just going to be a SharePoint list. Did I hit the wrong thing? I'll do a SharePoint list, connect that. And it's going to ask me for my site URL, which is this one. And then we'll see my DynamicsCon customer satisfaction survey. All I gotta do is click that and load it. So now I have access to all the data that we just pulled in. And you'll see in just a moment, we've got all those different questions and all that, so you can start building your graphics from there. But here's where it's really helpful to have that email address in the survey. And that's where we're going to grab a Dataverse connector. And we need our environment URL, which for me happens to be this one. And then sign in. Oops, that's strange. All right, so I'm going to grab accounts and I'm going to grab contacts. These are standard out of the box. Every Dataverse has them. So now that we've got all three of these sources into our data model, all we have to do to kind of analyze by things like industry, you know, our customer salespeople, anything like that, is we're just going to find our email address from the contact record, which is just email address 1 by default. And we're just going to take that survey question where we ask for the email address and hook them up in a relationship in Power BI. And then we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to take a field called parent customer ID on the contact record, which is right there. And then we're going to link it to the account ID in the account table. And that's really all there is to it. From here, you can start building your visualizations based on that data and make some really cool things. And I'm going to show you the one that I put together here for this specific survey. So you can see we've got the number of surveys we've submitted. We have our NPS score, which is calculated with that DAX formula that you'll have access to. Then we have the overall satisfaction. It's calculating that just as an average for that satisfaction question. And we can see our target is actually 4.5. We're a bit behind the target. So you can see there's conditional formatting on basically all this stuff between green and red at the worst. So you can see that's orange. This is sort of greenish, but not super great. And then there's kind of pie chart. Well, these are donut charts that show the distribution of questions. So we can do things like say, if people were strongly agreeing with this statement, what's their NPS score? It's very high, very satisfied, which makes a lot of sense. You may find that some of these questions don't quite correlate as much, which I think is kind of interesting as you start diving into this. And down here, we just have our comments, so you can take a look at some of these comments and see what people are saying. For example, in this, they say, great job on order number 3342. We could go and find the person responsible for that and tell them, great job. Or you could do things like that, or the opposite as well. Now, this is where that connection to Dataverse is really going to be cool. So what I did was I broke down NPS score by industry. So we can see that in this case, we have particular industries that are less satisfied and some that are a lot more satisfied. And then same thing over here on the map. So we've got this map color coded based on the NPS score. You can see most of them just have 1 because it's all sort of demo data. But you can see the shade will change based on the distribution of high scores to low scores. And in here we can kind of go in even deeper here and see states as well. So just kind of a really cool thing you can do. Because we asked for their email address, we were able to do that. So that linking up that I showed you earlier was exactly how I did that. So now with this, we can present this, we can have our survey complete, we can present this to our team, we can see what's going on, what industries we need to focus on for potential improvements, and which ones we might want to say, hey, we're doing a great job. All that just from, kind of starting with that very simple survey that we created in Microsoft Forms. So yeah, I hope that's been useful to you. So let's kind of move into the conclusion of the presentation today. Again, feel free to put any questions that have come up into the box, and I'll be around after the presentation to answer them. So it's very easy to build your survey in Microsoft Forms. It's such a simple interface, and it's really intuitive. I think you'll like it as you start working with it. And Power Automate is where you get into the distribution and preparing what happens after the fact, as well as getting your data ready for analysis. That's this whole SharePoint list process that I showed you earlier. You don't have to do it that way. There are a couple different ways you can do that, but that's just one way that I find that works. I really like SharePoint lists. Then with Power BI, we can analyze your responses, calculate your NPS and any other complex metrics that you want to score, and break it down by all these different categories that are important to you, whether that's industry, geography, different account managers. If it's in your system, you can use it here in Power BI to break it down. Again, that's just connecting that email from the survey to the contact to the account, and you're good to go. You're going to start making some really cool stuff. So as you're working with that, if you think of something really cool, be sure to let me know. I'd be really interested to see if anybody's kind of taken this process and kind of done something a bit different and what they've been able to do. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also reach me with any additional questions. If you missed the Q&A portion here, you can reach me at my email address there. And I'm also going to be presenting tomorrow as well, so be sure to stick around for that at DynamicsCon. I'm going to be talking there about surveys again, but in a different context. We're going to be using customer voice, which is a cool other product from Microsoft. That's sort of another way to do the same kind of stuff for it, but kind of have a tighter connection with Dataverse. I think you'll like it. So thanks again. Thanks for the community for your votes. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to you and to get to know all the people here at DynamicsCon. Look forward to working with you in the future, learning from you, and I hope that you'll be able to learn something from what I've done as well. So stick around DynamicsCon, and I will see you around. Hey everyone, thanks for attending the session, and we got a couple questions to go through. My name's Keith, obviously, and bringing on Savannah. She works on the team here at Innovia with me in the Power Platform, and she'll be kind of handling, gathering the questions that have come in, and then we'll respond to those.
Keith. So one question from Tony was, what do you think are the main benefits of making a survey this way rather than a company that already exists?
Well, I think that one of the key benefits is that everything that we've done in this session is all Microsoft. So it would be all tied into the data that you already have. If you have a Business Central environment, if you have Dynamics CRM, all that stuff is tied up to it, and with your Power Automate flows and your existing Power BI subscriptions, there's just a ton of synergy with all those products running together. And one of the cool things about this particular process is it's not terribly hard. You can iterate upon this and kind of build surveys as you need them.
Great. Another question we had was, how can I check if my survey respondents have actually responded?
Well, that's a great question. There's a couple of things you can do. One is just like the way that we set up the SharePoint list for the responses, you can also put a step into that Power Automate flow that's going to record it when one goes out. So you can kind of make a record, as it's going out, and then what you can do then is when that response is received, and you can just update that SharePoint list and with the note received response, and your Power BI dashboards, all you got to do is read that SharePoint. You can run some counts on those based on the different responses, and then you'll be able to tell, okay, how many people are actually responding, and then maybe put a metric in your thing that says response rate. You can put that in there too.
Very cool. You talked a lot about SharePoint in this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe elaborate on what else you can connect with?
Well, I mean, if it connects with Power Automate, I think I said it in the presentation, you can use it here. So if you don't want to keep that data in a SharePoint list, you can feel free to use Excel. That's a very easy way to do it. You can keep it in a Dataverse table if you've got one set up for it. You can write to that with the Power Automate flow. I mean, there's just so many different options you can do. If you're using Business Central too, I mean, if you have a custom table for these results, you can put those in there as well. Just a whole lot of options that you have.
Awesome. And say you have someone that is brand new. Are there any templates available?
Right. Yes. So there's not. I haven't been able to find any templates for Microsoft Forms itself, but for Power Automate flows, I mean, there are literally hundreds of different templates that include the Microsoft Forms actions and triggers. So there's a ton of things to get you started. Just go into flow.microsoft.com, look for the Microsoft Forms connector, and you'll see them all listed there.
All right. I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
When should you choose Microsoft Forms with Power Automate versus Customer Voice?
That's a great question. So Customer Voice, you should consider it if you really want to make sure that your data is going into Dataverse instead of Microsoft Forms, because it's already tied in. You don't have to. I mean, you can do it with Forms, but you'd have to add the step in. You'd have to create custom tables and get that all set up in advance, which you can do, certainly. But Customer Voice does that all for you. It's all set up already. So it's actually a really cool survey platform. It has some additional features as well. So it does the Dataverse thing for you. And then some of the other things that are built in are like the AI sentiment analysis. So that's built into say you have a long text field, it will do that for you. It also has its own mass email tool, so you don't necessarily have to use something else. We talked about how you can use Power Automate to distribute, but if you want to send a mass email, you can't necessarily do that through Power Automate by itself, but Customer Voice will do that for you. And then it has some Power BI analytics visuals put in. So if any of those things appeal to you, that might be a reason to choose it. But yeah, if none of that appeals to you, then certainly you can follow the process we outlined today.
All right, I think that is all about the questions that were presented. If anyone has any last minute questions, post them now.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna pop over to the view party. So if anyone wants to kind of chat at there, we can feel free to follow up there. Yeah, enjoy the rest of the DynamicsCon.